When you use keyframes to animate effects, those animations start and stop instantly. They have instant acceleration, and then the change is linear. The velocity is the same all the way across from one keyframe to the next. That temporal interpolation is called linear interpolation, instant acceleration, instant stopping, and linear speed, which is not natural. You'd rather start up gradually and end gradually. But for most visual effects, you don't notice that it starts instantly and stops instantly. But sometimes it's a good idea to use something called keyframe interpolation, where you kind of ease out and ease in. So I'm going to show you how to do that in this lesson. Let's go to Working Files, go down to Projects, and then go down to 0907 Temporal Interpolation. Now, temporal interpolation refers to how things change over time. Some effects in Premiere Pro have things change through space, like the motion effect, or some other effects like lens flare, where there's something moving through space. How those guys behave is called spatial interpolation. We're going to focus on temporal interpolation in this lesson. We'll deal in more detail with spatial interpolation in my chapter, Animating Motion Effects. So let's start up a new sequence here by taking this clip and dragging it down to the new item icon there. And now we're going to spread things out a bit by pressing the backslash key. And I want to apply two effects to this clip. So let's go over to the effects panel, click on it. We're going to apply our good buddy Gaussian blur. So open up Video Effects, Blur and Sharpen. And then we want to add Gaussian blur to this clip. So I'm going to make the clip active. I'm going to select it and double click on Gaussian blur, and that adds it to that clip. By the way, when you've added an effect to a clip, you see a little green line that appears there? That tells you that you've added an effect to it. Let's go on down a little bit farther. I'm going to go to Generate and add the lens flare. So I'll just double click on lens flare now to add it to that mix, and it immediately turns on. Let's go to the Effect Controls panel. First, let's turn off lens flare for the time being. Just click on the FX to switch it off. You can close the disclosure triangle if you want. And we're going to work on Gaussian blur. So I've got the current time indicator at the beginning, and now we're going to increase blurriness to something around 60 or so, and click on the repeat edge pixels to make sure we take care of that edge thing there. And now we've got it blurry, and it'll be blurry throughout. So we want to make sure that we adjust keyframes here over time. So I click the toggle animation switch to turn on keyframes. I'm going to go in a little ways now, let's say about that far, a few seconds in, like 2 or so. And now I'm going to take my blurriness value to 0, so it's sharp. If we watch how that changes, it instantly starts getting unblurry, and then it instantly stops when it gets sharp. There it goes, like that to that. Now you're going, that looks fine. I mean, it's no big deal that it starts instantly and stops instantly. I mean, it's really hard to see that it accelerates instantly and then stops like it runs into a brick wall, because it just is so gradual, and it's just this little visual thing. It's not something physical that you see moving around. But nevertheless, it's a good idea to let it start gradually and gradually, just as a regular workflow. So usually when you're doing some kind of keyframe animation regarding something that changes visually, it's generally a good idea to use this ease in and ease out temporal interpolation that's available inside Premiere Pro. And to get there, you right-click on a keyframe, opens up this context menu, and you see that the interpolation here is linear. It can be Bezier, Auto Bezier, Continuous Bezier, or Hold. We're not creating a hold keyframe here where it doesn't change at all. It does change over time linearly. Now this Bezier stuff is usually applied to spatial interpolation, how things move through space, but it can also refer to how things behave over time. But the real key down here is to go ease in or ease out. You want to ease out of this keyframe. Now that we've done that, it turns into an hourglass to indicate that you've changed it to ease out. But in fact, you've changed it to Bezier. If you open this up again, it says Bezier. It doesn't say ease out. So it's a type of Bezier interpolation here that allows it to gradually accelerate. Now you probably won't notice that it's gradually changing. It's not going to instantly go on a straight line diving down to sharpness. It's going to gradually start getting sharp, but then go at a linear speed to the end. So let's see how that works. Gradually change. So it starts out staying blurry just a little bit longer than it did before, and then it goes on a straight line diving down to that next keyframe. Well, we want to ease into this keyframe, so I'm going to right-click on it and click on Ease In. So now the keyframe interpolation will be, it'll gradually get unblurry, go on a straight line here for a while, then gradually settle down to being sharp. And if you could see that, more power to you. It's not something that you would normally notice, but it's just a good idea to use this ease in and ease out as you go from one keyframe to the next. Confusion arises if you now take this current time indicator a little bit farther in and change the value of the blurriness to make it blurry again. So what's happening now? Is it easing out of this one now that you eased into it, that's a little bit of an issue. It doesn't really ease out as nicely as it eased in. You can just go on one side or the other. Premiere Pro doesn't let you sort of ease in and ease out on both sides. That's something that can happen in After Effects, but not in Premiere Pro. But in fact, you're easing into this one. So you right-click on this guy. Let's say ease into that one. Then at least you get that ease in at the end. One little minor fly in the ointment, but barely noticeable, right? This whole temporal interpolation thing is much more noticeable if you've got something moving around. So let's go down to lens flare. I'm going to turn off Gaussian blur so we have that thing back to sharp again. I'll close the disclosure triangle. Let's turn on lens flare, open it up. What we want to do now is we want to put this lens flare in motion. So I'm going to click on the lens flare here to turn on its target. I'm going to move it over here someplace like that. Put the current time indicator at the beginning. There we go. And we're going to turn on keyframes there. That'll put a keyframe right for the starting point. Let's move it a little bit farther, like there, for example, 3 seconds in. Now I'm going to move it. When I grab a target like this, sometimes you have to be careful. If you grab dead center, you might grab what's called a handle rather than the target itself. So if you pull it down here, if you see the target not move, but you see a line move, that means you grab the handle and not the target. And the handle, these little guys right there, you can sort of see little dots there. Those are the handles. And they'll come in handy, when you are doing some motion changes, when you're doing spatial interpolation, which I discuss in the animating motion effects chapter. All right, let's move a little bit farther in. You'll notice right now it's a straight line, but when I grab this guy again and move it again, it'll automatically become a curve. It's what's called an auto Bezier vertex there. You have these little handles there that allow it to be a smooth curve through that point. That's the spatial interpolation, not the temporal interpolation. Let's go a little bit farther, like that, and drag it again, being careful not to grab a handle. There we go. So now we'll see how this behaves. We'll go back to the beginning of the clip. I'll click away so that you don't see the line there, and I will watch this. It starts instantly, kind of gradually goes from one to the next, because that's the Bezier motion interpolation, then bam, comes to an abrupt halt at the end. So it accelerates instantly at the beginning and decelerates, stops instantly at the end. Let's fix that. What you need to do is change the first keyframe to ease out, so right-click on it. Now you have two choices, temporal and spatial. So when you have an effect that has both temporal and spatial behavior, you have an option here, temporal and spatial. In the temporal, you want to change from linear to ease out. And for the last one, you want to change that one by right-clicking on it and go temporal, ease in. So now when it gets to the end, for example, it'll just kind of ease in to the end. See how it gradually stopped there instead of sort of abruptly stop? And it'll ease out now too. See how it sort of gradually starts and goes out like that? As far as how it behaves going from one keyframe to the next here, a lot of that is dependent on how far apart they are. If you look at them here, you can see the distance apart physically, but the distance apart here says how far apart they are in time. If I put that closer together like that, it'll go faster from one to the next because it's going a certain distance over a shorter period of time. If I spread it out this way, then it's going a same distance over a longer period of time. So a lot of the behavior here has to do with the distance between the two keyframes physically and in time, which you can adjust time over here and the physical side of things over here. So that's how you can use ease in and ease out to affect the temporal interpolation, to have things gradually start up and gradually end.